The Silver Age of comics has begun. Thanks to Stan Lee's inventive writing and Jack Kirby's explosive art, Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four, are a smash success. The biggest thing that they need now is what any good superhero team needs: arch rivals. We will meet and discuss the strange antihero Namor, the Submariner, and the legendary Doctor Doom today on Truth, Beauty, Comics.
Welcome to Truth Beauty Comics. I'm Levi, a cartoonist.
And I'm Felix, a guy who likes comics.
And this is the podcast where we look for transcendence in a pulpy medium.
And before we get started, I want to apologize. I have a frog in my throat. So I'm drinking throat coat coffee from my wife's favorite mug. Don't tell her. I apologize for me sounding sort of terrible. And also the last week, I don't know, we don't talk about it a lot, but Levi writes an excellent comic called Open Your Eyes, and I did, I've been sort of reading it in fits and starts 'cause it's coming out sort of regularly. He releases new pages, and I went back and read from the beginning and sort of plowed through, and it's really excellent. And I think it's worth reading. Even
Thank you.
if I didn't like Levi, I would like his work. So sometime check it out. Uh, but anyway, so today we'll be talking about issues 4 through 6 of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's early Fantastic Four comics, which introduced Namor the Submariner and Doctor Doom, and then have them team up. So, Levi, I know you're more of a DC guy. Have you read these issues before? And either way, sort of what's your initial impression of them?
Yeah, I have had this specifically the first appearance of the Submariner floating around in a collection for a while, and maybe it's in the Origins comics. They used to release kind of these collections of like the origins of all their big superheroes, and then kind of the maybe a follow up story for that. And I had those as a kid, and I think I probably still have those on my shelves. And I read this one early on. So this specifically the appearance of the Submariner is a story I've been familiar with, but not the first appearance of Doctor Doom. So that was his debut. Um, was new to me, and I guess maybe I could kind of say I kind of understand why maybe it doesn't make the huge splash, but we'll get into that because it's a little bit of an inauspicious kind of debut for such a significant character. But
It is striking because he is so for people who are very casual Marvel fans, their favorite villain tends to be a Spider-Man villain. It'll be Green Goblin or Doctor Octopus, and or Venom, especially 90s kids and all. And those are all great. But I think much more common with sort of more intense Marvel fans is Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom, it becomes this just astonishing character, and he's sort of strange in ways that don't that I think the beginnings of are here but don't really come out, right, because he is simultaneously this just unspeakably brilliant scientist on the one hand, but then also uh is a master of the mystic arts and magic, right? And so he's this sort of strange liminal figure, but he's also extremely powerful in both, right? He's not like a dilettante who's just sort of doing a bit of everything. He's really brilliant. Um, and he's also oddly, but both Namor and Doctor Doom are more than just villains. Namor
yeah,
especially, but Doctor Doom as well, from a relatively early stage, not these issues, but earlier, right? Virtually every, maybe not virtually every, but a heck of a lot of villains now in comics are constantly being made very sympathetic,
right.
and in ways that are sometimes interesting and sometimes just sort of old hat. I think Doctor Doom is much more compelling in the ways that they develop him, and some of the sort of weird dynamics that develop between him and the Fantastic Four.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Doom is interesting in that he developed, and I think this is an interesting aspect of him as a character that always that didn't make it into these issues yet. Not really, but the fact that he's kind of this ruler of like a European nation who really loves him, like he's for all intents and purposes seems to be a really good ruler. Like it's a good place to live. Where if so kind of almost maybe this is a poor example, but kind of like how Russians feel about Vladimir Putin, and the rest of the world feels about Vladimir Putin, where they really seem to like the guy, but everyone else hates him, kind of thing. And so it is an interesting dynamic where he's a bit more complicated as he goes, just in how he uses his power. Um, yeah, I've always so yeah, I think Doom for me he's probably, I would say, my favorite Marvel villain for those reasons mentioned. I think he's the right kind of ambiguous, whereas I
yeah,
would say maybe Namor's a little more of the kind of annoyingly ambiguous. That Doom, he's also the right level of superpowered too, I think, which is very cool. Like it's hard. He's like not Galactus, where it's just like, okay, this guy's like, so overpowered. He seems just, impossible to stop. Um, but he's not annoyingly kind of pathetic, So there's a real, he's very formidable, but not too formidable sometimes. So he's a good antagonist, and I think we haven't talked about his design either, but he looks fantastic. Right, that is something that immediately he's
yeah.
very visually striking.
I think that is a big part of his appeal. Kirby just had such a knack for creating visually distinct characters. I mean, you think about the four. I forget if we talked about this last time. I don't think we did, right? But if you look at the Fantastic Four, I mean, this image is not a Kirby one, but they're visually very distinct, right? Even if you have an extremely low quality print job, uh, you can tell, okay, there's one girl, that's Sue. There's one big orange one, that's the Thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's one who's usually going to be on fire in an action scene, and if he isn't, he's visually shown to be much younger than the other regular looking man. So it's Johnny, and
Mm-hmm.
then the one who's usually sort of hanging back and is a bit older or stretching massively, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can immediately identify them, um, and that's true of so many of the villains that he developed too. It's just really impressive to me.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but it really jumped out at me reading the modern versions of Fantastic Four, where Reed and Johnny, and literally like every guy looked the same. They're like these ridiculously jacked dudes, and they all just kind of have the same kind of facial structure, body types, and Kirby is just so good at that, with making distinct, even amongst his human characters, they look different and they're very visually iconic. And when he's able to go a little bit more wild with something like a Doom, it's a simple design, but it's so distinct. And you look at Doctor Doom and you immediately know what this guy's about. He just jumps out at you.
Yeah, and actually let's turn to the actual comics. I think if we get talking more, we'll want to be getting a bit more plotty. Um, so maybe if I'll start by talking um, about issue four. Um, so uh, so issue four introduces Namor, who is not a character original to this comic. Actually, I'm trying to remember if it was the 40s that he started, but maybe the 30s. At some point in the Golden Age, he was a character who was this really odd sort of anti-hero. Um, who his so what I've encountered of his Golden Age comics are, to my mind, really weird because he is to understand his power set, he's not dissimilar to Aquaman, um, except that he sometimes comes on the land and just kind of wreaks havoc and destroys cities and gets mad about things. Um, and it's just so strange to me because even though there is this kind of like grittiness to you know uh, some of the Golden Age ones that I've encountered more of, like Captain America or Superman, um, it they tend to at least try to have a relatively straightforward moral kind of approach
Right.
to the. I mean, not even exactly superheroing in Namor's case, but yeah, they're very strange comics. Maybe someday we'll look at some, but I'm not jumping at the bit for it. Uh, anyway, and they reintroduce him here as an antagonist, but also, as we'll see, unsurprisingly, given uh, the approach that Stanley wants to take to the characters, right? That will be defining for Marvel of kind of heroes with real life problems and dealing with interpersonal conflict. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Namor, right, is in love with Sue, and
Hmm.
we'll see it in a couple issues. Like Sue is not entirely uninterested. But anyway,
Right.
in,
Yeah.
in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of the plot, so the team encounters the Submariner Namor, but he's lost his memory and is living as a vagrant in New York City. Uh, Speaking of which, we've shifted from the first issue, which talks just generally of Central City, to New York City, and
Oh,
that'll
interesting.
continue to be a sort of central place for Marvel Comics. Even later, as we get more like West Coast Avengers and things, New York still has this kind of unique place in in the Marvel canon. But anyway, so uh, Namor is there's this really striking image of when they realize who he is. Um, Johnny is reading one of these old a beat up comic mag from the 1940s of the Submariner, and they it's just so strange. Johnny shaves off his beard using his flame power. Um, and then realizes he's the Submariner. It
It's
just
a yeah.
it's
It's
cheesy
a
even for this time period of comics.
That's one of the weird things about this era of Marvel comics. I'll just point out, it does real meta stuff. Like there's an issue later we're not going to talk about where Stan Lee and Jack Kirby become characters. Like it's like they're writing the comic and Doctor Doom comes to them, and it's really weird for Like if you're a Marvel reader who's it's just odd stuff that they stopped doing. It seems like at some point. But it's very meta, I guess, using the modern phrase. But yeah,
And
it's
it
odd.
it well and it's funny too because they pull back from this relatively quickly, right? So I like Fantastic Four, but I'm not a huge Fantastic Four person. So I haven't like read through all of the Silver Age Fantastic Four. What I've read a lot more of is Thor because I just love
Hmm.
Silver Age Thor. Um, and there's basically none of that I can think of, right? And that's just a few years later. Uh, but it's interesting because some of that does come back in the 90s and aughts and teens and 20s. Because you do, I'm trying to remember the names, but there's this character who is kind of above the gods, who is basically Jack Kirby, um, who comes in. I'm trying to remember the name now, and I think it's the Fantastic Four who meet them, but I would need to look this up. Because I haven't actually read the comic. I've just seen stuff online about it where they I think want to bring somebody back to life or something and kind of like go beyond the universe to this place where there's like a guy at a drawing pad.
Yeah.
Who seems to be Jack Kirby. So like but they're done much more dramatically now.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
way that yeah, but yeah, they pretty quickly I think start putting Stan, I think, starts putting the fourth wall breaking stuff just into caption boxes, right? And so it's much more of here's Stan Lee talking about what's going on in this issue,
Right.
True Believers, in a way that I think is a bit different. And there's another, I forget if it's one of the issues we read today, but so the sort of second Silver Age Marvel book was the Hulk. And so one of the issues, has Johnny like reading a Hulk comic saying, "Oh wow, this guy
Yeah.
reminds me of you, Ben." Um,
Yep.
and there is a lot of this. So there's a kind of playfulness that I do think sticks around for a long
Hmm.
time with Marvel, and I think DC has a playfulness too, but it's a different kind of playfulness, Silver Age playfulness. Um, but anyway, this moment when he discovers it's the Submariner, um, it's just a wild choice.
It is very odd.
So anyway, they uh burning off his beard restores Namor's memory as as it presumably would for anyone. And as a result, Namor learns of his home Atlantis having been destroyed. Enraged, Submariner vows revenge on humanity, as he's wont to do, and summons a massive sea monster to attack the city. Fantastic Four battle the creature, with Johnny ultimately forcing it back into the ocean by creating a fiery tornado. Namor, impressed by Sue Storm's beauty, offers to spare humanity if she marries him, but she refuses, and the issue ends with the team preparing for future confrontations. It's a really strange issue.
It is.
I think
Yeah.
I mean, it's timed better than the first issue, but I think it's. I mean, I have to glance at the table of contents. By the way, I don't know if we've mentioned, we're using the Mighty Marvel Masterworks edition, or at least I am, which are a very affordable way to get early Silver Age Marvel comics that I commend to you. As long as you're not a collector who needs it to be super high quality, it's great for just reading. Um, this right, so the first issue we talked about is weird in various ways, but it's not nearly this weird. And the second and third issue are pretty straightforward uh, Silver Age comics. This one is just
Hmm.
odd. I don't know. What did you think of this one?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the things that jump out at me reading this as I'd say a casual a, a casual Fantastic Four fan. There's certain things that are still feel off to me. Things like, so for example, by this issue, if you're jumping in from number one, now they have their suits. They have, and they look great. They have the designs are starting to get clearer. There's things like you mentioned, they're in New York City. There's the Fantastic car, which I absolutely love. The Fantastic car. I don't know what it is about that, but it's just such a weird, fun little design. Um, but there's also like the dynamic, there's weird things. I think specifically the Thing feels very off to me as a character. Like they really don't know who he is yet, and the team treats him like crap. Basically, it's
Yeah.
like it's so weird because they're like just call him like they don't do this in the new. Everyone calls him Ben, right? But here they call him the Thing, and it's like it's really odd to call like your best friend like the Thing, this weird name. Like it'd be like if I'm like a low moment and be like, oh, I'm so fat, and they're like, we'll call you Fatty from now on. Like you're just like, okay, like thanks guys. Um, so it is even in that level in his design for me. Like there's they don't really. This is the one design. Another interesting thing is like Kirby figures out how to draw the torch kind of over these subsequent issues. There's a few design changes he'll make, but if you look at the way he drew the torch in the first issue, it's like very flames shooting off him, and he's simplified him down to a much more streamlined design that looks fantastic. Like, so he looks much more kind of on character. But the thing is, his face is like much more like they add, and I'm not sure when this happens, but he gives him a much more prominent brow line and kind of opens up his eyes a lot more as the stories go, which makes his face much more sympathetic and expressive. Like in this, he's just always like dour. Always just kind of frowning. So it's odd as a character, but and so yeah, this whole issue is a little strange. I like a lot of the art in it, and but it is kind of just another odd, strange issue. Namor himself is an interesting villain, I think, and I always try to think with villains like when they how do they mirror the heroes, right? How are they kind of playing off the heroes? And I think, like I mentioned with the thing, he's kind of like just a sad character at this point. But it is interesting. I think he does kind of get a good little arc in this, where he is kind of the hero that stops the monster. And we didn't mention it, but he straps a nuclear bomb to his back and climbs down the throat of this huge monster. So he's handling his loss in a productive way, right? He's lost his humanity. And Namor is handling his loss in a kind of raging way. So they do mirror each other. There's an interesting tension there. And there's also an interesting mirror between, I think, Namor as a character and Reed, who are both people vying for Sue's affections. In that, to me, Reed is like very waspy man of science, kind of thing. And Namor is like this primal kind of wild man out of the ocean, So there's some interesting parallels here that I think work, but the storytelling is a little strange how it's executed.
And another piece that struck me reading this time, because so as we're recording, the trailer for the new Fantastic Four movie, the sort of first teaser trailer, has just released, and many of the rumors were true. That it would appear that Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman, is really going to be the kind of heart of the movie, as she is for so many of the comics. And Sue at this point in the comics is very half baked.
Yeah.
I think she becomes a really, I mean, she becomes, people say, the heart of the team. She really is the one who keeps them all together.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from the fact that she becomes quite powerful, right? Like I forget if I think it's a Hickman comic, right? Where at one point Doctor Doom comes in and Sue basically says, right, because she has some sort of telekinesis powers. Well, I mean, they're not exactly telekinesis, 'cause it's sort of it's religion or invisibility, but we don't have to get into it. Let's just call it telekinesis. Where she basically says to him, like, if you don't do whatever it is, I forget if like one of the kids is in danger or whatever. If you don't do whatever, like, I can snap my fingers and like pull apart your brain and you're dead.
Hmm.
And that's true, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
she could kill Doom like that, whereas the Thing, Johnny, Mr. Fantastic couldn't. Right. So she becomes much more powerful. But I think more interestingly than that, she develops a lot emotionally. Um, and and in some under the pens of some authors, the relationship between her and Reed is really beautiful. Um, and at this point, she's still really kind of, I I don't want to be too infantilizing, but just like a flaky chick. Yeah,
Yeah.
like it's sort of,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, like, she uses her invisibility at certain points to make things happen, but a lot of it's just being invisible and drinking soda. I don't know.
Yeah, that was
Right.
that was a funny thing because there is a subplot where they're looking for Johnny and they all kind of scour the city, and she just immediately goes and gets a soda while invisible. It's kind of like nobody really knows what to do with her at this point. Like, well, I guess
Yeah,
she'd
you're
go
really worried
get a
about your brother,
soda.
aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It's sort of emblematic. Um,
yeah,
and in one of the later issues, when, Namor's second appearance, we'll get to, uh, yeah, it's just not clear how connected to Reed she really is at this point. I don't know. Um, yeah,
yeah.
all that is to say, the one character who feels kind of fleshed out at this point is Namor, because he's a jerk and he's always going to be, and he has weird, complicated motivations. Um, and Johnny is simpler and a little meaner than he'll be later, but I think his
Hmm.
core is there. And Reed doesn't have the kind of emotional depth he will later, but he's generally himself. Like the way he acts is ways that I can see pretty much any iteration of the character acting.
I do think Ben is an interesting one because it seems like that's where Stan Lee is trying to invest most of the kind of character work. Who gets
Yeah, the
like the most, like
pathos.
he's emoting the most. Yeah, pathos, and has the saddest kind of, like, he briefly turns back into a human in this, and then turns right back, and he's distraught. Um, but I think it doesn't really work very well for his character. I think he works much better as kind of the lovable, kind of curmudgeonly, but he's just it's less sad, to have
Yeah.
someone who's like enjoying life still and funny and has a sense of humor, even though they're trapped in kind of a monstrous body. Um, I don't know. I just think he works better as a character rather than this like tortured soul, as someone who's
Yeah.
very confident and kind of a schlub, later. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I really like Ben in a lot of the later Fantastic Four runs, but they're really finding their feet. And also, I mean, I think I think both Lee and Kirby are finding their feet to a certain extent here. Like you, right? Neither of them really know what's about to happen. I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
the comics are selling way better right now that we talked a little bit about the sort of biographical side last episode where supposedly Lee was on the verge of quitting. And then his wife said, "Hey, like you always want to write the great American novel. Like, why don't you just write a really good comic and see if you find it satisfying? And if not, then okay, quit." Um, and it did, and it was Fantastic Four, and it sold really well, and it continued to. And then sort of birthed the Marvel side of the Silver Age of comics. Um, so but and we see various ways that Lee is finding his feet. We haven't really talked about the writing style, but one of the things Lee would always say in later interviews about what he was doing was, I wasn't scared of putting in a $5 word, um, or using longer sentences and trying to enter into the minds of the characters. Uh, and he's still kind of finding that writing style. I
Yeah.
think he has moments of it that are quite good. He also develops really the kind of character of Stan Lee as the narrator. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that, hey, true believers, da 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 da. That's starting to develop, but it's still pretty embryonic. But also on the artistic side, right, as you indicated, the way that he is, right. I mean, I look at the first issue depiction of Johnny, like you said, there's all these sort of details and flames. Versus at this point, you have a really kind of streamlined Johnny. This is actually the issue right after, but and I think that I don't know which I like more, but they're clearly this one is much more sustainable. It takes a lot less time to draw that one. Um, and I also think like his art is better now because Kirby's been an artist for a long time. He did a lot of Golden Age stuff. His art is clearly better now than it was in the Golden Age. Uh, but I think it'll be much better even in like 20, 30 issues, let alone when he's doing like the
Mm-hmm.
Galactus trilogy and introducing Black Panther and Wakanda and um yeah, and so it's just sort of interesting seeing them both growing. But it also means that these early Fantastic Four issues are, at least to me, I don't want to say they feel like a slog, but they don't breeze by the way that, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, the early Spider-Man do.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's it's still finding its feet here. It's not it's not going to reach kind of the heights of what's to come. And that's, there's a certain fun in that. I think I do like reading. I enjoy reading early Tintin. But Tintin in the Land of the Soviets is not the same thing as Tintin in Tibet. And it is interesting to see, and this is much more further along than Tintin in the Land of the Soviets was. So they're even if they were, even if they never got better than this, I think people would still remember them as interesting, writers from their time. But they haven't hit the stride. Even Kirby, he's not where he doesn't have the kind of flair I think that he'll develop, and he doesn't have the dynamism that he's gonna reach yet. But I still look at this and he's very, very good. Like if I just found this and Jack Kirby never did another comic, I was like, yeah, this guy was really good. He knows he has a knack for design. He has a knack for kind of framing. It's not perfect by any means. But I still find a lot to appreciate in it. Even especially compared, he's probably the best artist at Marvel at this time. There other artists would get better. A lot of the artists kind of progressed together as through the Silver Age and got way better. But I look at this and I go, this is a lot better than a lot of the stuff that DC was turning out at this time. Even though he hasn't reached his kind of full potential.
I forget who it was. One of the editors, or might have been other Marvel artists, was describing Stan Lee's attitude towards art at Marvel in the Silver Age, which was he wanted Kirby to be Kirby, Ditko to be Ditko, and everyone else to be Kirby. And you see that, right? Like, so for instance, Don Heck, who I think is an underrated Marvel artist, he's not on the level of Kirby, but it is really good. He drew a lot of the early Thor comics, and it's clear throughout that he's aping Kirby, that he's sort of supposed to do action the way that Kirby does action, and I think he actually does it really well. But I, you can see that, right, in a way that Ditko, which I do really want us to cover some Ditko sometime, but he has this really strange and very different style. Whereas like the house style for early Marvel that isn't Ditko is basically all Kirby-esque. And you can see why even in these early issues, because the action is really compelling. It's not as good as it's going to be in a few years, but it still has a lot going for it.
Yeah.
With that said, is there anything else you want to sort of touch on about this?
Yeah. Well, we can come back to Namor at the end because he comes back into it.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to summarize issue 5?
Sure. Yeah. So in issue 5 of the Fantastic Four, the team faces off against their first major supervillain, Dr. Doom. Doom kidnaps the Fantastic Four by trapping their headquarters in a magnetic net and forces them into a dangerous mission to travel back in time using his time platform, which I think is super cool, to retrieve Blackbeard's treasure. And stranded in the past, the team disguises themselves as kind of a Back to the Future scenario. As pirates, only for Ben Grimm, the Thing, to accidentally become the infamous Blackbeard. And they eventually return with a chest, but trick Doom by replacing the real treasure with chains. Doom attempts to kill them, but the team escapes, and Doom seemingly perishes when his own device backfires. This issue establishes Doom as the formidable foe and also introduces time travel into Marvel. So Dr. Doom, another really kind of the perennial big bad, like we said, of Marvel. What did you think of his first appearance here?
Mixed, but still memorable.
Right.
I think the sort of opening image, which we'll have to put in the notes, has. So, I mean, you've been told the name is Doctor Doom, but basically this guy you've never seen before, in a huge green cloak with a mask, bending over a chessboard with basically statues of the members of the Fantastic Four and a really creepy vulture and few books, one of which is Science and Sorcery, and the other one is just called Demons. Um,
Demons, that famous book.
like, yeah, Dostoevsky, right? Right, and you just like this, I think, really grabs you. Like, I see that, and I want to know about this villain. Um, and so there is, right. I do think Kirby's, as we were saying before, knack for character design is on full display. That like you have this guy who's sort of covered in armor, um, and has this creepy kind of mystic quality to him. Um, and you also get his backstory, which we didn't touch on in the summary, but in like 5 panels, you get that he was an old friend of Reed's and was fascinated by sorcery and black magic. Uh, he accidentally brought forth powers which he couldn't control. Um, we find out later that the reason he did this was in order to try to commune with slash bring back to life his dead mother. Um, and he managed to stay alive, but is permanently disfigured and left college. And also
As you do.
there's later artists will kind of play with this, um, and they'll kind of go back and forth between is Doctor Doom like so profoundly burned and disfigured that he's genuinely like to the average person when he sees him he just looks sort of terrifying, or
Mm-hmm.
is it actually like a single relatively minor but permanent
Hmm.
scar that he's just so fixated on that he can't conceive of himself as like being worthy of showing his face,
Yeah.
which is something people will play with later. But just taking it on its face value at this point, he's got a face covered in bandages. Oh, actually, he was expelled from school. Sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I mean that's an interesting sort of backstory, and it's cool that it is, I think, the first bad guy with whom a member of the four actually has history. And that history will come to really matter. In this comic, it doesn't really. Uh,
Yeah.
but I do like this comic a lot. I think the time travel plot is just really fun. Um, and like you said before with the Thing, Lee is really still figuring him out. The Thing as Blackbeard looks great, but
Yeah.
he also at one point like wants to stay back in time as Blackbeard and just be a pirate because people like him there, uh, which is not something later Thing would be doing, and is willing to basically double cross the others. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the art
100%.
in this, I think of the three, this one's art. There are just a lot of really memorable images. Everything from like as I said, the Thing is Blackbeard to Johnny about to drown and on page 126, and Mr. Fantastic reaching to get him, and
Yeah.
Johnny on 122 flying around the ship. I think the art here is great. And
Mm-hmm.
Kirby is just clearly really giving his all. And I don't know if this is sort of the time when like the success is becoming clear and he's really starting to put a bit more work into it, because it does seem like a step up from earlier issues.
Yeah, there's a lot in this that impresses me, and I'm glad you called out the art because I think that's my favorite part about the pirate thing, and it's one you can tell. It's interesting to me when you can tell what certain artists want to draw and what they don't. Um, sometimes you look at these comics and you're like, this guy really did not want to draw a city background. I've been there numerous times myself. I'm like, I don't want to draw a car. Like I don't care about this car, but there needs to be a car here. But man, I hate drawing cars. So when you just look at the amount of different things that he's drawing, and then he has a castle, he has very detailed, like, pirate ships and this old world, all these costumes and stuff. It's really creative. Um, and I do think it is kind of just flexing his abilities, that he's like, I'm going to, we'll draw a story set in, on the sea in a pirate ship, with pirates and all this. And there's, and he does a fantastic job of it. It makes me, I would read something like this in an adventure story. So that from the artistic perspective, I think it's very good. Another page I want to call it is 127. I love this page where it's this what's it called, Doom's time travel device, whatever it is. It's like lowering across them, and it's, as they do, they go through time. And it's just a really great little bit of storytelling, and just kind of composition. I'm a big fan of that page in particular. I think the thing I don't love about this story is I feel like the time travel plot takes a lot of the focus off of Doom as a character. He just kind of proceeds into the background until he gets this kind of quick, denouement at the end. And I would have liked more him to be the major focus of this story.
Yeah, and I think this is I think this is sort of true of both. I think the next issue is slightly better in this regard, but even so, they almost don't realize what they have in Doom. Um, and so he is,
Yeah,
yeah, he's just behind the scenes for too much of this. Uh, there is the sort of strange um moment that we didn't mention in the summary where the thing attacks Doom and they realize that Doom is actually the Doom that they thought was Doom is a robot replica, and the real Doom is actually in a different room. Um, that, yeah, I guess there's a little bit of reliance in this one on kind of cheap excitement over character drama
yeah,
in a way that I think later Silver Age Marvel stuff is not gonna lean into. Because I think the best of it really does confront us with the characters and
yeah,
their experience
yeah.
in a
It,
way
it
that
does
this
feel
one
like they're
is. Yeah.
figuring out that formula still here.
Anything else about this issue?
The only thing is, Doom needs better safety controls on his stuff because he just gets blown up all the time. So he needs to be more cautious.
Uh, so, Fantastic Four number 6, Doctor Doom and Namor the Submariner form an alliance, and Doom is the one who suggests it to destroy Fantastic Four. Doom provides Namor with this strange device that is seemingly and effectively all powerful super magnet that they use to lift the Baxter building, which is, I think, I forget if it was introduced earlier, but this is the first issue where you really get like a map and outline of the Baxter building, which is where uh, the Fantastic Four work and live. And there's this great image a few pages in that sort of shows the just all the crazy technology and everything that
Yeah,
I don't really like. Um, but anyway, so Namor is initially sort of conflicted over it because of his love for Sue Storm, but eventually goes sneaks into the Baxter building, sets up the device, and then uh, the building is sent into orbit. Namor thought that he was on Doom's team. Turns out Doom is double crossing him. When Namor realizes that this betrayal is happening and that Doom wants to destroy him as well, Namor turns against him. Using his strength and electrical powers, Namor disables Doom's controls out in space, causing Doom to be flung into deep space, landing on an asteroid. With the threat neutralized, Fantastic Four returns safely to Earth, but the issue cements Doom and Namor as sort of recurring threats in the comics rogues gallery, because this is the first sort of returning villain. Um,
yeah.
for Fantastic Four, and therefore, or I should say, these are, um, and therefore for sort of Silver Age Marvel. Um, what did you think of this issue?
I think out of the three, this was probably my favorite because it felt it felt the most focused. And there's a lot, artistically. I feel like Kirby's continuing to experiment here, try some interesting stuff. Not all of it's very successful, but it's definitely it's interesting. Um, it's it's also interesting to me how they're the continuity that they're establishing with their villains. So it's kind of monster of the week, but it's also has plot points from before, but it's still approachable. Like you could pick this up and read it, and you wouldn't totally be lost. It's not like a scene in a movie. It's a self-contained kind of story of the Fantastic Four, but they're building kind of their world. And so I do think it's interesting from that point of view. But really, I think this is more of a story of the conflict between kind of Namor and Doom, because the Fantastic Four are kind of passive throughout this
Yeah, I was
story.
really interested in that about this issue. That it's not, it really isn't the Fantastic Four show. It's it's focused on this sort of anti-hero of Namor and Doom, who comes off as the sort of completely evil one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it works. They're still, I think, working on developing villains who really are fully fleshed out characters in their own right. Namor, I think, is at this point, and Doom is still sort of just this cackling monster. Um, I also think just the idea, there are just so many issues with the sort of science side of this that even if you could make a magnet like this, it would just obviously rip through the ceiling, not pull up a like 40-story
Yeah.
building. And I, that like that was sort of difficult for me to get over in a way that like I realize we're reading a comic book about like a man who can stretch himself, miles,
Right.
and a girl who turns invisible, etc. But like this one I struggled with my suspension of disbelief a bit. Um, but nonetheless, it was really fun, and it was really cool seeing Namor in action against Doom. I think
Yeah.
it was really effective. And this is space is going to be very important for Marvel Comics in time. And while the Fantastic Four got their powers in space, and we've had a villain that we didn't read on the podcast, but the Skrulls coming from outer space and all. This, I think, them going into space is sort of interesting. Not that it's kind of pulled out uh, as a kind of emotional experience, except insofar as it's really dangerous for them and they're worried about dying. Um, but I really like Kirby's depiction of space here. It is there's this experience of the Earth getting further and further away, and then eventually sort of not being visible anymore. That I don't know. It's just really cool. Like
Yeah.
I feel like in the moments when I was able to sort of suspend my disbelief over it. I felt very much like a little kid reading this comic specifically. Uh, that that I think is harder to experience as an adult, and I appreciated it, and that's something that I particularly associate with Kirby's work, and
Yeah.
so and I have not really experienced in the earlier issues, and so I feel like this is when he's really getting his feet under him, and understanding. Like, I don't know how much of it is him growing as an artist, and how much of it is him just putting the work in, realizing that these comics matter and that he should be sort of really putting his best foot forward, but he's doing it
Yeah.
at this point. And and so I think like I really think relatively soon, Lee and Kirby just get everything together and they start going from strength to strength. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
that's my kind
there
of
is some
general take.
yeah, there's some interesting developments here too, even artistic. I think like on page 154, you see the infamous kind of Kirby crackle. Um, and then on page 155, like it's almost like by getting out into space, he's starting to develop these visual techniques that he'll use a lot more. I think that's one of the things that Kirby really learns how to do compared to what you see here is he gets really good um, at kind of abstract ways of communicating um, what's going on. So he's very good. He becomes very good at learning which details to leave out. Interestingly, so to put all the emphasis on a specific hit or a specific connection happening on a panel. Um, and how to express something like so that this panel on page 155 of Doom getting blown up again. This happens with regularity with Doom in the early going, but there's he's just he's not even fully outlined. It's just white and kind of the image of his hands and a lot of his figure is left out, but it communicates what's going on so effectively. And speaking as someone who draws myself, like that's actually really hard to develop that instinct of what to leave out, to communicate that. And it can be incredibly effective. And Kirby's kind of the master of that. And you see that being developed here, these more abstract ways of drawing that he'll really, really get good at. And so there's some interesting stuff that makes it an appearance here that's exciting to see. And from a plotting perspective too, I do think like Namor in this story really reminds me of a lot of other Lee characters. Like the Silver Surfer is one that really jumps out at me, and I'm not sure why. I think Lee, when he's trying to have kind of the conflicted anti-hero character, tends to send them off on kind of monologues and kind of have them mooning over someone, and um, I kind of prefer the Doom, like I'm evil, but there's a different side to me, as opposed to the, I don't know, melodramatic stuff.
I
But
love the Lee melodrama. That's my bread and
yeah, you
butter.
either love it or hate it, I guess. Like sometimes I'll read Silver Surfer issues and I'm just like, shut up, man. Like, stop. Like,
Silver Surfer, I think, gets a little far.
he's just flying around the universe like moping. But yeah, he and I think stepping back, I think it works well for kids, right? He knows his audience. He's not, it's not being overly complex. And it is interesting. It is interesting to at least have a character who has conflicting emotions. Um, and it's interesting to me too how much this. I mean, kind of one of the things about the Fantastic Four is like Sue has a thing for Namor and vice versa, and that's apparently from day one. Pretty early on, they've kept that kind of going. Um,
But it's
and
funny because I think it's like a little bit more. It's sort of schoolgirlish here.
yes,
I don't know. It feels like
well, they both have photos of each other,
yeah.
which I find hilarious. They're like, like you found my portrait of Neymar.
It just reminds me of in the Parent Trap when the two Lindsay Lohan kids are stuck in the sort of like isolation cabin or whatever. One of them has a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio and they bond over how beautiful he is. And I just
Yeah,
think of this, it's just like
yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Like it, I don't know. It's just it's strange because there are throughout these early Fantastic Four, there like it does have the embryonic stages of pretty much everything that's going to make the Fantastic Four and Marvel Comics more generally so great and so enduring. Um, but they're just not. It doesn't quite work for me yet. It does pretty
Mm-hmm.
soon, but it's still. I don't know. It's fallen through my hand like sand.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
a way that like by the time in a few years Ditko and Lee are working on Spider-Man from issue one, it just works. Just every piece of it. Which, is particularly good because Fantastic Four, we get something incredible, like 120 issues or something of Lee and Kirby together, whereas Ditko quits Marvel like say like 35-ish issues into Spider-Man, so you only get a few hundred pages of Ditko Spider-Man, whereas you get thousands of Lee Kirby Fantastic Four.
I mean, I agree. I think it's interesting reading these because clearly it was working on some level for them, because they were selling a lot. It was popular. Um, and when I do read this compared to kind of uh, there is more gravitas to what's going on than a lot of what was happening in DC at the time. Um, and there's
That's a
ideas,
that's a
but
that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah,
yeah,
there's slightly more gravitas here than in Silver Age Batman and shark repellent things.
exactly. Yeah. So it's there's something that's working at the time, but it's still not to that point where I'd say it's timeless. It's which is still it because there's a lot of stories. Like I love reading old newspaper comics, and all of those start off so rough, and sometimes it takes the artist years to figure out um, you know what their what how what the best way of telling their story and how what kind of stories they even want to tell and how the characters work. But it's just that process, especially with like newspaper strips where you're drawing a cartoon every single day, and just that repetition, you see them becoming better and better and better. And I feel like you're seeing that happen with Marvel comics at this point, where it's like the market's there, it's supporting them, so they're able to keep making these at a really quick rate, and that improvement's happening, but it hasn't really hit its stride yet.
Yeah. Um, are there any kind of broad thoughts you have about these three issues or sort of early FF in general, before we sort of close?
Yeah, I wonder who if I'm trying to think of what how I would where I would recommend jumping in here. I don't know if I would. I mean, this would be certainly something you could easily give to a kid, and I think they would probably enjoy reading it. I certainly would have enjoyed it younger. As an adult, there's aside from just kind of the appreciation of the art, I find a little bit less to draw me in at this point. But I'm very excited to read. I'm excited to read the Galactus kind of saga
Yeah, which
because
we'll be
I
doing next episode.
yeah
Yeah.
because I do I have really enjoyed the Fantastic Four in the past. I love the kind of family dynamic. It's not quite clicking yet for me. Um,
Yeah, I think it
s-
gets much stronger soon. Um, I feel like a kind of, well, if you want to read like one or two Fantastic Four stories, I'm not going to give you these early issues. Um, if you're already sort of bought in, or particularly if you're, a kid who's going to sit down and read the whole thing in, 2 hours and say, "Hey, can I have another?" I go ahead and throw the first, this first sort of 10 issues at you. But yeah, I think there are better places to start and come back because, in part, because I've said this before and I'll say it again. One of Lee's greatest strengths, I think, as a writer, was that he understood and would constantly tell people writing and drawing for Marvel that every comic book is going to be someone's first comic book. And so you need to be able to pick up a comic and understand it. Uh, and that's something we've really lost, I think, in American superhero comic book culture, at least. Uh, and so I think you can kind of pick up, you can just like pick up Fantastic Four at like issue 40 and have a better time and then come back with these.
Yeah.
Um, but these are good. And in a way that like I think, something like I mentioned Spider-Man and Thor, right? They both start, at least to my mind, really good. Because they've already kind of gotten a lot of the pieces together. They figured out what the Marvel method really is. They've figured out how Lee wants to write character. Yeah. So and in terms of kind of like appropriateness, like the early Fantastic Four comics, all they really have is fantastical violence and sort of character drama. So like they can be read by anybody. But I'd be inclined to just, unless you're like really into it and want to read a bunch of them, start a little later. Maybe even with what we'll be covering next episode in the Galactus trilogy, which is issues 48 through 50. Um, I think that's everything we have to say for this
Yep.
episode, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. So if you enjoyed this episode of Truth Beauty Comics, there are three things you can do to help us out and support us. The first is to keep listening and tell your friends about us.
Second is to review the podcast, giving it 5 stars wherever you listen to us.
And the last thing you can do is consider contributing to our Patreon with a monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can get perks like access to exclusive episodes, voting on topics for upcoming episodes, and even an original drawing from Levi. But most of all, you can help make this podcast sustainable by paying for our comic books.
And that's the end of the episode. You can reach us at truthbeautycomics@gmail.com or on our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and remember to take comics seriously and have fun while doing it. Hey, we nailed